He was the last English king to die in battle, depicted by Shakespeare as a scheming hunchback. Richard III was killed in 1485, and the whereabouts of his body has been a mystery for centuries.
There was a time, archaeologists have discovered, when being King of England was a dead-end job. It certainly was for Richard III, whose battle-battered bones have been found stuffed into a grave definitely not fit for a king.
In 2012, scientists extracted DNA from a skeleton buried beneath a parking lot and found genetic proof that the Wars of the Roses, a 30-year civil war that killed over 50,000 people, was fought over a bloodline that was a lie. The researchers who discovered this knew exactly what it meant, and they buried it in academic footnotes for over a decade. Now, a 2026 reanalysis has ripped the cover off and confirmed what they were hiding, and what it proves changes everything we thought we knew about the English throne. The impossible find. For 527 years, King Richard III lay forgotten beneath the wheels of everyday cars in Leicester, England. No headstone, no marker, no memorial of any kind. Nothing to suggest that one of the most controversial kings in English history was rotting just a few feet below the surface. His grave unmarked, his bones undisturbed, his story waiting. Richard was the last Plantagenet king of England. His family had held the throne for over 300 years, the longest ruling dynasty in English history. On August 22, 1485, he rode into the Battle of Bosworth Field wearing his crown, leading a cavalry charge directly at his rival, Henry Tudor. It was a desperate gamble: kill Tudor personally, end the war in minutes, and secure the Plantagenet dynasty forever. Instead, it ended that dynasty forever. Accounts describe Richard fighting ferociously even after being unhorsed, surrounded by enemies on all sides, refusing to surrender. His own allies were abandoning the field. The battle was lost, and still he fought. When he finally fell, his body was stripped naked and thrown over a horse like a sack of grain. His enemies paraded the corpse through the streets of Leicester for 2 full days, beaten, mutilated, displayed for anyone who wanted to see the end of the Plantagenet line. The message was unmistakable. This bloodline is finished. They buried him hastily in an unmarked grave at Greyfriars Church. No monument, no ceremony, no prayers spoken over the body. Just dirt over bones and a dynasty erased from power. Decades later, during the Reformation, the church was demolished. The land was sold, built over, and forgotten. Legends claimed someone had dug up his remains and thrown them into the River Soar. Most historians assumed Richard III was gone forever. Then, in 2012, a screenwriter named Philippa Langley convinced the University of Leicester to excavate a city council parking lot she believed sat on top of the old church. Every academic expert told her she was wasting her time. They said the bones were in the river, long gone. She pushed ahead anyway. On the very first day of excavation, they found human leg bones. What emerged over the following weeks was extraordinary. The skeleton belonged to a man in his early 30s, buried in a hastily dug grave that was too short for his body. His head was forced into an awkward upward angle, crammed against the end of the hole. There was no coffin, no shroud, no ceremony of any kind. This wasn't the burial of a king. This was the hasty work of enemies who couldn't be bothered to dig a proper hole. The skeleton carried 10 distinct wounds. 8 were to the skull alone. 2 were immediately fatal, a sword strike to the base of the skull that sliced into the brain, and a halberd thrust straight through the top of the head with such force that the blade emerged from the interior. This man had been surrounded, helpless, and executed with savage precision. But the detail that stopped the archaeologists cold was the spine. The skeleton displayed severe scoliosis, a pronounced sideways curvature that would have made one shoulder sit visibly higher than the other. For centuries, Tudor propaganda had painted Richard as a twisted, deformed monster. Shakespeare called him a poisonous hunchback toad. The bones proved the propaganda was exaggeration built on a grain of truth. Richard did have a curved spine. He wasn't the monster of legend, but he wasn't perfectly formed either. The age matched, the injuries matched, the spinal condition matched. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Against all odds, they had found Richard III. But they needed absolute proof. They needed DNA. The DNA bombshell. Here's the thing about DNA. Most of your genetic code is a shuffled mix of all your ancestors. Bits from your mother, bits from your father, all recombined into something unique. That makes it useless for tracing a specific family line across centuries. But there are two exceptions, two types of DNA that don't shuffle. They pass from parent to child virtually unchanged, generation after generation, creating genetic signatures you can follow like a trail of breadcrumbs across hundreds of years. The first is mitochondrial DNA. Think of it as a special genetic code passed down only from mothers to their children. It doesn't mix with the father's DNA. It stays the same. A mother passes it to her daughter, who passes it to her daughter, who passes it to her daughter, an unbroken chain stretching back centuries. If you can find someone alive today who sits at the end of that chain, you can compare their mitochondrial DNA to a medieval skeleton and know whether they share the same maternal ancestor. Richard III had no surviving children, but he had an older sister, Anne of York. Genealogists traced Anne's female descendants through 17 generations, 500 years of mothers and daughters, until they found a living carrier, Michael Ibsen, a Canadian furniture maker living in London. They compared the skeleton's mitochondrial DNA to Ibsen's. Perfect match. The specific signature they shared is extremely rare, found in only a tiny fraction of Europeans. The odds of coincidence were astronomical. In February 2013, the University of Leicester announced it to the world. The skeleton beneath the parking lot was King Richard III. The world celebrated. Headlines everywhere. Documentaries were commissioned. Plans began for a proper royal reburial. Books were written. Philippa Langley, the screenwriter everyone had dismissed, had been right all along. Richard III had been returned to history, but the scientists had also run a second test, and those results told a very different story. The second type of inherited DNA is the Y chromosome. It passes only from father to son, never through mothers, never through daughters. It creates a paternal signature you can trace through the male line across centuries. The research team had found living male line descendants of Edward III, Richard's great-great-grandfather. If the Y chromosomes matched, it would lock the identification down even further. They didn't match, not even close. The Y chromosome pulled from Richard III's skeleton looked nothing like the Y chromosome carried by the living descendants of Edward III. Somewhere in the 19 generations between Richard and his modern male line relatives, something had gone wrong. Someone's mother had a child with a man who wasn't her husband, and that child was raised as legitimate royalty. Nobody questioned it. Nobody knew. One line of DNA confirmed Richard's identity. The other proved his bloodline was broken. The entire Plantagenet claim to the throne rested on an unbroken father-to-son bloodline, supposedly ordained by God, sacred succession, divine right, the foundation of medieval kingship itself, and the DNA proved that chain had a fraudulent link. But here's where it gets ugly. The question wasn't whether the break happened. The DNA proved it did. The question was when. Did the break happen after Richard III, somewhere in the 500 years of descendants used for comparison? That would be a minor scandal. One noble family with a skeleton in their closet. Or did the break happen before Richard III? That would mean Richard himself, his father, or his brother, King Edward IV, had no legitimate blood claim to the throne they fought and died for. The 2014 research team published their findings in Nature Communications, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. They presented both possibilities as equally likely. They buried the dangerous answer under careful language and let the world focus on the celebration. A lost king had been found. That was the story. The Y chromosome problem became a footnote, a quirky detail that added mystery without threatening anything anyone wanted to believe. For over a decade, that approach worked. The uncomfortable truth hid in plain sight, sitting right there in the published data for anyone who cared to look. But the celebration drowned it out. Most people never read past the headline. And the researchers who understood the real implications stayed quiet. They knew the answer was destructive. They also knew they couldn't prove it. Not yet. But the technology to prove it was coming. If you're hooked on this royal cold case, hit subscribe. Because what the 2026 reanalysis proved is even more devastating than the original discovery. The 2026 bombshell. For over a decade, the royal DNA scandal sat as history's hottest cold case. Scientists knew the bloodline was broken. They just couldn't prove which side of the family tree held the fracture. The question haunted academic papers and online forums. Historians and geneticists debated it privately. Everyone who understood the stakes knew the answer mattered enormously, but nobody had the tools to settle it. Then an independent research team launched the Royal Bloodline Genomic Reanalysis Project, a collaboration between geneticists from the University of Leicester, Harvard, and the Max Planck Institute. New long-read sequencing technology now allowed them to analyze massive, unbroken strands of ancient DNA instead of tiny degraded fragments. What had been impossible in 2014 was now routine. The margin of error dropped to near zero, but technology alone wasn't enough. They needed an ancient control sample, DNA from someone who died before any suspected break could have occurred. They got permission from Westminster Abbey to sample the tomb of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. John of Gaunt was the son of Edward III. He died in 1399, generations before any potential break in Richard III's line. His Y chromosome would be the Rosetta Stone, the baseline against which everything else could be measured. If his Y chromosome matched the modern Somerset's, it would prove the Somerset line carried the true Plantagenet signature. And it would prove that whatever was different about Richard III's skeleton was the break. The results were a bombshell. First, the deep analysis proved with 99.9% certainty that the Somerset family's Y chromosome line was unbroken going back to the 15th century. Their DNA carried the authentic Plantagenet paternal signature, passed faithfully from father to son for 600 years. The break was not on their side. Then they tested John of Gaunt's Y chromosome. It matched the Somerset's perfectly, 600 years apart, and the genetic signature was identical. This was the smoking gun. John of Gaunt had the true Plantagenet Y chromosome. The Somersets inherited it and preserved it through 600 years of unbroken descent. The paternal line was intact on that side of the family tree, which meant the different Y chromosome, the one pulled from Richard III's skeleton, was the break. The false paternity didn't happen in the 500 years after Richard's death. It happened before him, in his immediate family. The break was not after Richard, it was before him. His father was not who history claimed. The study pinpointed the fracture to somewhere between Richard III's grandfather and Richard himself. The spotlight landed on one man, Richard, Duke of York. Richard III's father, the man who launched the Wars of the Roses by claiming his bloodline gave him a superior right to the throne. And suddenly, a 500-year-old rumor snapped into focus. King by name, not by blood. During the Wars of the Roses, enemies of the House of York spread a vicious accusation. They claimed Richard, Duke of York, was not the legitimate son of his supposed father. They said his mother, Cecily Neville, had an affair while her husband was away on military campaign in France. They even named the alleged father, a handsome English archer called Blayborn, who served in the garrison near where Cecily was staying. At the time, everyone dismissed it as political mudslinging. Medieval warfare ran on propaganda as much as swords. Accusations of illegitimacy were standard weapons used to undermine a rival's claim to power. The Blayborn story was treated as slander, vicious, politically motivated, and beneath serious consideration. 500 years of historians agreed. Nobody took it seriously as historical fact. The DNA proves the accusation was true. Richard, Duke of York, the man who started the Wars of the Roses by claiming his royal blood, gave him a superior right to the English crown, was illegitimate. His Y chromosome did not match the Plantagenet line. He was not his father's son. The entire foundation of his claim, the claim that launched 30 years of civil war, was built on a bloodline that wasn't his. If the Duke of York had no legitimate blood claim to the throne, then neither did any of his children. His son Edward, the charismatic warrior who seized power as King Edward IV, had no genetic right to the crown he wore. Edward's sons, the tragic princes in the Tower, whose disappearance remains one of history's darkest mysteries, were not legitimate heirs to anything. And Richard III himself, who claimed the throne by declaring his nephews illegitimate based on a technicality about their parents' marriage, was himself illegitimate by the only standard that truly mattered: blood. The entire House of York, the White Rose faction that waged 3 decades of brutal civil war, was built on a genetic lie. Every alliance they forged, every battle they fought, every life they took in the name of their dynasty, all of it rested on a bloodline that wasn't real. The Wars of the Roses tore England apart for 3 decades. Conservative estimates put the death toll above 50,000. Entire noble families were wiped from existence. At the Battle of Towton in 1461, fought in a blinding snowstorm, more Englishmen died in a single day than in any other battle in the nation's history. Bodies were stacked so deep that soldiers had to climb over the dead to keep fighting. The snow turned red for miles. All of it, every battle, every siege, every massacre, every execution, was fought over competing claims to the throne. Lancaster versus York. Red Rose versus White. 2 branches of the Plantagenet family, each insisting their bloodline was the legitimate one. The DNA proves the York claim was worthless. Every drop of blood they spilled to defend their dynasty was spilled for a lie that none of them may have even known about. This is the truth that sat buried for over a decade. The scientists who tested Richard's DNA in 2012 saw the Y chromosome mismatch and understood it pointed toward a scandal at the heart of the York dynasty. But without the technology to prove which side of the family tree held the break, they presented both possibilities as equally likely. They made it sound uncertain. They made it safe. They made it a footnote. They let the world celebrate the discovery of a lost king while hiding the discovery that he wasn't really a king at all. The lie beneath the crown. This discovery doesn't just close a cold case. It detonates 5 centuries of assumptions about who had the right to rule England. Consider Cecily Neville, Richard III's grandmother. Medieval infant mortality was catastrophic. Noble women who failed to produce male heirs faced devastating consequences. Loss of status, loss of property, loss of everything. Her husband was away on military. Campaign when she gave birth. Some historians now argue she acquired a healthy baby from a servant or peasant and passed it off as her own. If true, she wasn't a passive victim of circumstance. She was a calculating political mastermind who single-handedly set the stage for the entire Wars of the Roses with one desperate lie. And then consider Richard III himself. The traditional story paints him as a power-hungry villain who murdered his nephews to steal their crown. But what if he was the only member of his family who didn't know the truth? Imagine a man who fought his entire life for a dynasty he believed in, who idolized his brother Edward IV, who bled for the House of York on battlefield after battlefield. Then imagine he discovers, through a deathbed confession or a hidden letter, that his family's claim to the throne was fraud, that everything he killed for was built on nothing. What if the removal of the princes in the tower wasn't a cold-blooded power grab, but a desperate, twisted attempt to erase the living proof of a lie he had just uncovered? It doesn't excuse whatever happened to those boys, but it transforms Richard from calculating monster into a tragic figure, a man destroyed by a truth that was never supposed to surface. The DNA doesn't care about political implications or comfortable assumptions. It reveals what is, and what it reveals about Richard III is devastating. For 500 years, history told one story. Everyone believed it. Now, DNA has exposed a deception that shaped kingdoms, started wars, and altered the course of a nation. The king in the parking lot wasn't just lost to history. His entire dynasty was built on a secret none of them may have known about. The crown he wore, the wars he fought, the blood he spilled, all of it in service of a bloodline that wasn't his. And the world tried to keep that truth buried for another decade. It didn't work. Drop your theory in the comments. Was Richard a villain or a victim of a lie he never knew about? If this story rewrote history for you, hit subscribe. We're digging up secrets the world tried to bury, and you don't want to miss what's next.